If I were to ask you what is your least favorite Mission Impossible movie, what would you say? From what I can see, it seems to me as if Mission Impossible 2 and 3 are the only contenders. And that is actually pretty impressive, given just how long this series has been going. Most of these films are loved, not just enjoyed. With that in mind, last summer I recall being deliriously excited to watch the new movie, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Yeah. The 7th entry in the franchise. I had every reason to believe it would be great. It was made by the same people who made Rogue Nation and Fallout. Both great movies.
We gotta talk. Need to rethink this. Out of my way, Hunt. Walker, we got a problem. There's a storm and we need to...
I recall family visiting at the time, staying for a few days, so I couldn't really go see it opening weekend without risking being accompanied by family. Yeah, accompanied. So I just pretended to have zero interest in the movie until they left. Until they were all the way back home, across the country. So I went second weekend. It all worked out for me. I would finally get to watch it in all of its glory, on the best screen possible. Wait, what? What the f*** are you saying? It isn't playing in the Max Theater anymore. Well, what in the f*** is taking all the good screens? Barbie. Oppenheimer. What the f*** are you talking about? So yeah, the movie got pushed aside by Barbenheimer, and I wasn't happy. I had to go watch it on a comparatively crappy screen, instead of the max screen that I'm so accustomed to, so bear that in mind. I wasn't in the best of moods. I'm not saying in any way that tainted my viewing experience, but it certainly didn't help. With that said, last night I watched it again, right? My second viewing. And I can now say for certain, I think this may just be the worst Mission Impossible movie ever made. Alright, what are the movie's big issues? I could just very simply list them off in sequence right now, but I think to best support my issues with the movie, it will be best to compare these areas to that of my favourite film in the series, Ghost Protocol. Directed by Brad Bird, the same guy who made The Incredibles and Ratatouille.
Huh? Oh, come on! You gotta admit this is cool! Just like a movie!
Alright, listen, it is pretty challenging to find a scene in these movies that isn't, let's say, directly relevant to the overall mission of said movie. But Ghost Protocol starts with some pretty great team building with that prison break scene. We see Benji hacking into the prison systems, and there's this new character, Agent Carter, on the ground, meeting Ethan at the extraction point. Their escape plan is methodically planned out. I love how Ethan just lays there, not moving a single muscle, until Benji hacks into the prison speaker systems and blasts that song. They're using this well-known song as a time reference so that the whole team's on the same page. It's very smart, and honestly, even at its simplest level, it just makes for a fun scene. Ethan strays from the plan to help somebody else get out of the prison. Somebody who gave him information. Somebody who will be killed for doing so. This gives layers to Ethan Hunt. He isn't just some cold-blooded operative. He's a man who just wants to do the right thing.
I always take care of my friends.
My friend.
We see Benji refuse to open the doors for Ethan as he goes off plan, showing how squirrely he is, operating in this grey area. He allows everything to be planned for, where he just freaks out. We see him eventually open the doors out of loyalty to Ethan. Agent Jane Carter, played by Paula Patton, is a very welcome addition to the cast, and they give her her own motives that you want to be seen carried out. You see, the movie starts with an Ethan Hunt type character being killed off. The casting call probably asked for a Tom Cruise type. It was clearly very intentional. This is actually really smart, because what it does is it immediately gives credibility to the antagonist here, Sabine Moreau, because the guy she killed may as well have been Ethan Hunt. It more or less was. She is dangerous. As it turns out, that character was Carter's partner, creating a personal vendetta that the audience can get behind. Dead Reckoning starts in a Russian submarine, with characters we don't know, and won't get to know. This entire scene is just set up to show you what the doohickey of this movie is, and how powerful it can be. The crew seem likable enough, and I actually do enjoy how they aren't killed by their own idiocy. They play things smart, they use logic, and they still end up dying by their own hands. There's just no meat on this bone, and it's pretty indicative of where this film's priorities lie. Everything is about the stupid key and the stupid entity. Simply put, this movie prioritizes its plot over its characters. Whereas Ghost Protocol was a movie about the characters that just happened to be on a mission. It's challenging enough to get a movie that's plot focused to work in the first place. But the problem here is that there is just so much going on that it is difficult to follow along with what is going on half the time. There is just so much exposition being thrown at us constantly that makes it very hard to know what's important and what isn't. A very common occurrence in this movie, right, is we'll have a room full of characters and there'll be one person who needs to be filled in. And they'll just go line for line, person by person, explaining to this one guy what's going on. It's so unnatural. It's like a fucking Shark Tank pitch.
Now directed at a single objective.
The world's intelligence networks.
The very truth as we know it.
More often than not, it just feels as if this movie is treating you like a fucking idiot. That you need to be spoon-fed every little bit of information. Throughout this entire franchise, I haven't really cared too much for the character of Luther. But when we first see him in this movie, he is spewing stuff at us that we literally saw with our eyeballs 3 minutes ago. I'm gonna ask you a question. Does anybody here remember the plot of Mission Impossible Fallout off the top of your heads? Blah blah blah, secret organization, blah blah blah, secret man pulling the strings, blah blah, nuclear bomb at the end, yeah, all that. The point here is that nobody really does, but we can all recall certain stuff from the movie, right? We all recall the great back and forth between Henry Cavill's character, Walker, and Ethan Hunt, right? That was great. The way they would constantly try to one-up the other. How they had different ideologies for doing missions. Henry's character, Walker, is the hammer, while Ethan Hunt is the scalpel. Remember that stuff? Of course you do. My point is, the plot didn't matter, and that movie is beloved, and made almost $800 million, the highest earning movie in the franchise. This movie is the ultimate drinking game. If you were to take a shot every time a character in this movie says the key or the entity, you would legitimately be convulsing on the floor within 45 minutes.
Key, key, key.
Entity. Key. 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 Key.
Entity.
Complete key. Entity.
The entity. Key. Entity. The key.
The key.
The entity.
The key!
The key.
This key.
I found the plot to be kind of juvenile and poorly thought out at times. I don't know how many times they did this thing, right? Where one character has the key, and then in the next scene, the key is just suddenly gone, vanished into thin air. It was stolen. This happened so often, it was unreal, and it got old very fast. At one point, there's this character, right? And they are just speaking as if they have the key, as if they could just move on to the next stage of their plan. I'm just sitting there thinking, gee, that sounds absolutely fantastic, but the key is not in your fucking possession. You haven't got it. What are you doing? Check your fucking pockets. And then sure enough, no key. Go figure. I was going to try and comment on the characters a bit here, but there just isn't much to talk about. I don't really care about a pretty good amount of characters in the movie. I didn't really miss Luther. I never actually cared for the character of White Widow. Benji is Benji, doing Benji things, but it doesn't really give him much to do. And am I the only one who never really cared for Rebecca Ferguson's character, Ilsa? I feel like this movie tried to make her seem important to Ethan Hunt and the overall franchise, but I just never really saw it, to be honest. I didn't really care a whole lot when she died, and they made it out to be some big devastating occurrence, like some pivotal point. I'm just sitting there thinking, okay, and? Rebecca Ferguson must have been sick of playing this dull character for all these years. I would actually bet that she just did not want to re-sign that deal to appear in more movies, so this killed her off. She decided that she had other things to be doing. Excuse me. The Mission Impossible villains have never been that great, but this movie just takes that to a whole new extreme. The antagonists in this movie are just awful, and I'll get more into that later. There's no one to really connect with as a viewer. The movie is in desperate need of camaraderie and a solid team full of good characters, like what we had in Ghost Protocol with Ethan, Benji, Carter, and Brandt. We're following Ethan and Grace, but they're just doing things. They don't give the characters enough time to breathe and, I don't know, have a conversation. It's all about the plot. Move, move, move. And I think that's in part this movie being so long. I think it's over 2 hours and 40 minutes, and it was just meant to be part one of a story. They have since decided not to name the next one Dead Reckoning Part 2, because even they know that they need some distance from this movie. There's not actually a lot happening here as far as characterization goes. Instead of that camaraderie I was talking about, we get playful banter. Every movie needs a bit of fun. and it does certainly help here. That car chase and run with Ethan and Grace is actually pretty well done, but by the end of it, the two characters are no closer to one another. Nothing has changed between the two of them, except for the fact that they have gone from point A to point B. That's it.
Yeah,
You ready?
I'm ready.
Grace wants to be with Ethan to stay alive, and Ethan wants to be with her to keep her alive. But the thing is that Ethan will be behaving this way with anyone. There is nothing special at all about Grace that will make Ethan Hunt feel as if he absolutely has to keep her safe. All he does is acknowledge that Grace has been caught up in this thing that is so out of her depth. So for that reason alone, he wants to make sure that she survives. But make no mistake, Ethan Hunt would do this for anyone. But because of this, they don't mean a whole lot to the other. There isn't much depth to this relationship once we're past all of the playfulness between the two of them. At one point he has to involve her in the mission out of sheer desperation. But even with that, I'm not too sure why she's actually even here, other than the fact that they need somebody to replace Rebecca Ferguson. What does she really add that is of any significance? What does she bring out of our characters that we haven't seen before? Just to give an example of what I mean by that, let's take Jeremy Renner's character, Brandt. From Ghost Protocol, right? That was our first time seeing him in this franchise. He ends up on Ethan's team out of sheer necessity. Sure, he could have walked away, rented a hotel room for a few days. There was nobody after him, like with Grace. But he can't just walk away out of ethical reasons. He wants to help. The way they connected Brandt to Ethan was actually really well done, and added a layer to their relationship. They more or less Sandmaned him, and tied him to the death of Ethan's wife, which could have gone really poorly, as I'll get into later. Brandt feels personally responsible for her death, and feels immense guilt. I won't get into the details here, but Brandt has always regretted not warning Ethan about the danger they were in at the time. He had his orders, and wasn't permitted to interact in any way with Ethan Hunt or his wife. From his point of view, him not warning Ethan, like his gut told him to, is the reason that Ethan lost the one person who meant the most to him. For most of the movie, Brandt feels very uneasy around Ethan. It is clear that he's hiding something, and it gets to the point where even Ethan himself asks, "What's up? What's going on?" But Brandt just cannot bring himself to tell Ethan the truth. Later on we find out that Ethan's wife isn't dead, but that Ethan himself staged a scenario to fake her death. He doesn't know that Brandt feels responsible for the death of the woman he loves. Towards the end of the movie, once the mission is complete, Ethan finds out who Brandt really is. He finds a connection between the two of them. He sits the whole team down and asks them to join him on the next mission. Everyone accepts, but not Brandt. That guilt still looming over him. Ethan stops him as he walks away. He has never told a single soul that his wife is actually alive, but he knows that despite Brandt carrying that burden, he proved himself to be a valuable asset to the team. He proved himself to be a good man, with honor and courage. And so, Ethan tells him his little secret, that his wife is alive and well. He frees Brandt from that burden, and allows him to move forward. This reflects positively on both Ethan and Brandt. Both characters force the other one to evolve and grow. Where is this stuff in Dead Reckoning? Mission Impossible franchise has never had top tier villains, but Dead Reckoning just takes it to a whole new extreme. The villain of this movie is a man named Gabriel, who's acting on behalf of the Entity. The Entity handpicked him. The same way they Sandmaned Brandt to have a link to Ethan's past, they also Sandmaned Gabriel to have a link to Ethan's past. But this time it didn't work. Apparently he killed some woman Ethan was seeing at the time. This was apparently before the events of the first film. I think we can all agree that this film having a sentient AI antagonist is pretty boring. It could have worked fine if Gabriel himself was well written, but he's not. The Entity more or less tells him what to do, what to say, when to go to the bathroom, absolutely everything. For all intents and purposes, Gabriel no longer exists. He is the Entity. He is a window into the Entity. At one point, right, during a confrontation, he says something along the lines of, "The Entity has told me that I'm going to get the key tomorrow on the train." So he just leaves. He's just like, right, better get going so. Better go buy a ticket.
The key will come to me tomorrow on the Orient Express.
He doesn't even have to think. And there is no real conflict between him and Ethan. It is totally one-sided. It's like watching someone play online chess versus a bot. It's just really boring. There is one scene that drives me absolutely nuts though. The entity can more or less predict everything. It knows what you will eat for breakfast 23 days from now. At one point, Ethan and Gabriel are fighting on the train, and Ethan is going to kill him. Then he's interrupted by these two guys. Gabriel stands up and just walks backwards off the side of the train. He had a timer set on his watch for this. You know how fucking stupid this is? Did the entity know that those two guys would interrupt Ethan? Did it run simulations of Ethan and Gabriel's fight and predict its duration to the exact second? How can it possibly predict these things? Ian Malcolm's head would explode if he watched this movie.
That is one big pile of shit.
What if Ethan, let's just say, woke up that day with a bit of a cold and wasn't as strong as the entity predicted? It's nonsense, and Gabriel is just putting his full faith in it. Jumping off the train into a truck bed that was positioned there probably a few hours in advance, knowing full well that this would happen. Let's even assume for one moment that the entity could predict all of that. Shortly after this, Gabriel reaches into his pocket for the key, and it isn't there. Ethan swiped it during their fight. Gabriel is honestly shocked here, and therefore, so is the entity. It couldn't predict that? The one thing that's been happening the entire fucking movie. There's also something with Pom Clementive's character, Paris, that really bothers me. Somewhere in the middle of the movie, Ethan spares her life, and then later on, in the third act, Gabriel just turns to her and says something like, "You will betray us because Ethan Hunt spared your life." And I don't know about you, but if I'm Gabriel, I'm not going to announce to somebody that I'm about to kill them. Especially someone with a deadly skill set. You would try and be sneaky about it. Of course, Pom's character gets away and goes on to spill some very important information on Gabriel's plan to Ethan, telling him all about the Sevastopol submarine from the start of the movie. Question, why the fuck does she even know about the Sevastopol submarine? Did I miss something? She was basically just a gun for hire, an assassin, the muscle. Are we to assume that at some point Gabriel and her were just standing together in an elevator and he just turned to her and said, "Let me tell you my evil plan"? Really? It's just lazy. Benji having to loot suitcases to find the tools that he needs to open up this bomb is hilarious. Surely it isn't that common for people to be traveling with tools. Was there some sort of handyman convention? I don't know. That scene where everyone's at the club and then Ethan looks around to realize he is standing inside the entity is pretty lame. Like, what's it going to do? This isn't actually the entity. What it is a visualization of the entity being displayed on some screens. The movie itself makes a big deal about how difficult it's going to be for Ethan to get on the train, but we see Pom's character Paris getting on in a much easier way. Makes the big stunt seem pretty irrelevant. And speaking of the stunt, just wasn't that great. After that incredible stunt, climbing on the outside of the Burj Khalifa, in Ghost Protocol, they kind of made it a thing to have some big stunt in each of the films going forward. And I'm actually all for this. The one in Rogue Nation, hanging onto the side of that giant plane, was incredible and will be talked about for decades. The Halo jump in Fallout wasn't as impressive, but it was shot in a very cool and authentic way. The big stunt in this movie, driving a motorcycle off a cliff, dismounting, and then pulling a parachute. I feel like that is the kind of thing that you might very well just find on YouTube. When Grace is wearing a mask to disguise herself as Vanessa Kirby's character, White Widow, they make such a point of her eyes being a different color. I wouldn't be surprised one bit if they used VFX to increase the size of her eyes, just to make it more apparent. And they did this just for the audience, because apparently we're idiots. There is no scene where a character notices that her eyes are a different color, and that blows her cover. It is legitimately just for the dum-dums in the audience. Pom's character Paris, switching sides from Gabriel to Ethan, just feels so natural. The movie itself spent so much time portraying her as an absolute lunatic, but all of a sudden, she has this weird sense of morality. Where did that come from? Huh? I've trashed this movie a lot, but there are some things in it that I enjoyed, but they were often very small elements of the movie. I do like how they poke fun at the face masks in this movie. I've always found it to be a really silly element of these movies. I love how Kietrich asks Ethan how he plans to get out of here, and Ethan turns to him wearing his face, with a smile that just says, "Don't you already know, sir?" There are some really solid secondary characters, but actually nearly go as far as calling them tertiary characters. That police captain in Rome, I think he was called Spency. The guy had so much character, and he really didn't need to. Something I always appreciate in movies is when they make these little nothing characters feel like real people. It's really funny when Grace escapes the police station and Ethan tracks her down by following the damage she's causing as she drives. She really isn't doing much to disprove of these stereotypes. I think this is also the scene where the camaraderie between Ethan and Grace starts to bubble to the surface a bit. It's not as good as other movies, but it is fun, and Hayley Atwell makes you forget all about Benji and Luther. Grace is such an awful driver as she refuses to sit in the driver's seat, only for them to crash and tumble down these stairs, with her ending up right back in the driver's seat. It's pretty funny.
Wait, what?
Benji complaining about being under a lot of pressure, while Ethan is literally on a cliff edge, is also really funny.
Pull yourself together, because I am under a lot of pressure right now!
And it reminds me of a similar scene in Ghost Protocol where Ethan just narrowly evades death, plummeting off the Burj Khalifa. Everyone in that room is exhausted and in utter disbelief. And then Benji just walks in, saying something like, "Well, that was not easy."
That was not easy, but I did it.
And all he did was change some numbers on the hotel room doors. I think that is all the positives. I have pages of notes on Ghost Protocol here in front of me, and I wish that I could implement more of them in this video. I'd love to talk more about how sharp the writing is, and how it trusts the audience to use their brains. I love this sequence where they plan to give the villain fake nuclear codes. But the villain is smart. He comes to the hotel with a guy to verify the codes. And Ethan and the team just immediately freak out. It's a very real moment, and Brant nearly f***ing loses it. He has to be convinced to hand the codes over. Then the team decides to give the villain the real codes. That is their only real option right now if they want to eventually stop this guy. I would love to get into all the fantastic scenes and sequences in the movie, really going into why the Burj Khalifa stunt is so great, and my favourite in the franchise. I love that hallway sequence with the projector that tracks the eye movement of the guard sitting at his desk, contorting the image as he moves, as Ethan and Benji hide behind it. I love the sequence where Carter has to seduce an Indian billionaire to get information out of him, and the whole team is just there listening in via their earpieces, as this very strange man gives Carter his best moves. How he only makes his final advance on Carter once Ethan kisses her. How Ethan just knew that this guy would be more interested in her if he thought there was a competitor. It's just such a fun sequence. I love the interactions between Ethan and that Russian agent assigned to bring him in. I think his name is Sidorov.
Hospital?
I love how Brant is the perfect intermediary for the audience, and the great humor. Blue is glue, red is dead.
Next time, I gotta seduce the rich guy.
How the movie says a lot while saying very little. There is much less dialogue in it compared to The Reckoning, and it's the better for it. In summary, go watch Ghost Protocol, because that is the real Mission Impossible experience. I wish Tom Cruise and the crew the best of luck with the next movie. I am a little bummed out though, because as far as I'm aware, that movie is a direct follow-up to this. That worries me. With that said, I am still a huge fan of the series. If we can get just one more great movie before they hang it up, I'll be very happy. And you know what? Even if they were to stop right here, I am still overall very happy. One bad movie doesn't undo years of quality work. Earlier I alluded to the notion that I think this movie may be the worst in the franchise, but that is only because it's been so long since I last watched Mission Impossible 2 and 3 that I cannot say definitively it is the worst. What? Stop what I'm doing. Go watch them now. Yeah, alright, give me a sec. Oh, this is actually quite tough. But yeah, I think it is the worst.